Our next panelist is Azhar Sayeed from Red Hot. So Azhar, welcome, and look forward to listening to you for the next 4 or 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Sanjay. I think the previous panelists spoke a lot about technology and its use cases. I'm going to dive a little bit straight to the point in terms of what does it mean with respect to the technology and how does it translate into what we do. Okay. Let me just categorize my thoughts in 2 or 3 buckets. First, let's talk about different sets of use cases. I think there's a lot of that has been spoken about different sets of use cases, but when it comes to monetization of those use cases, I think there's a lot that we need to learn still. To me, that's a big roadblock in terms of monetizing those different types of use cases. Everybody understands fixed wireless access is a great thing. Fixed wireless access provides, that last mile, it solves the last mile challenge. However, and it also levels the playing field for new entrants in the market. However, you need a lot of deployment of those antennas much closer to the users. Particularly if you're using millimeter wave band, there's a high investment curve that's required to go deploy those access points closer to the subscriber. So everything comes at a cost. What we need to do is improve cost performance. I think Costas actually said it earlier on. He said something really good, which is technology will be there. It's about how you operate that piece of technology is when you start to see the gains from that particular technology. So from a cost performance perspective, if you're still going to design your infrastructure to proprietary hardware, proprietary software, then you're going to end up paying a lot more in terms of the licensing costs and fees. What you really need to start looking into is open source implementations. And that's where we play to our strength. We build open source infrastructure. And the reason why I sincerely point the community towards that is look at what's happening in ORAN. In Working Group 8 in ORAN, for example, they're talking about reference implementations of CU and DU. And these are reference implementations. Pretty soon they'll be mature implementations. And hopefully that can actually put all of the NEPs and even people like me on our toes in terms of driving some of those costs down with respect to investments that are required. The second point that I would raise in this area, particularly, is in the space of spectrum. We believe there needs to be some policy with respect to how you allocate spectrum, how you manage spectrum, and how you charge for spectrum. And this goes towards actually the telecom secretary, because in my personal belief, I think if you expect the same type of behavior that you saw with 4G auction or 3G auction, I believe that's a non-starter from a 5G perspective. Sincerely, because of the amount of, again, investment it's required to actually recoup costs and provide that level of service. So maybe there's a different context. Maybe it's on a usage basis, maybe it's on a balloon payment basis. I don't know what it is, but I think I'll leave it to the policymakers to decide that. Now, my last important point that I'll come to is softwareization of the infrastructure. Unless you really look at that particular infrastructure and solve it using software, so which means use as much general purpose hardware as possible. And today, I believe all components of the 5 technology can be run on general purpose hardware. There's hardware acceleration that's available, so you don't need to go to dedicated ASICs, dedicated devices anymore. So solve that problem with software. Then you can actually use the same software to automate. Once you automate, then you can actually take that data, you can do telemetry. Once you take that data, you can do then intelligence on that data, do analytics on that data, and create a closed loop feedback control system that allows you to make it completely autonomous. What would really, in my personal opinion, be successful for 5G is to actually make that infrastructure autonomous. From software, I'm dealing with the entire infrastructure, from soup to nuts, from core to edge to RAN, all in software, all intelligent and autonomous.
I think we've talked a lot now about building the network. We've talked about a number of use cases of IoT and AI on that. What we haven't talked yet about is actually running the network, and what are the ways that 5G enablement is going to have that change versus what we see today. So Azhar, let me go with you from a Red Hat perspective. Tell us a little bit about softwareization of infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. 5G is seen as an enabler technology. So what does it do? Through technology, it enables you to do certain new things. Everybody's talked about use cases on the panel and also before this panel as well. There are, of course, also huge investment costs with respect to deployment of 5G. Deployment of spectrum, acquisition of spectrum, deployment of many different, macro cells, micro cells, femtocells. As you increase data rates, you need, a smaller cell size capacity to address the same type of data rate per subscriber. And also adding all of these different use cases such as slicing. Network slicing is a requirement or is something that's enabled through technology in 5G, but how does it get realized on the infrastructure? These are the things that software needs to be able to turn them on and enable them on the infrastructure. Also, to drive costs down, you can't rely on those previous hardware-based equipment anymore, the big gateways where everybody deployed SGWs and PGWs. Well, it's now about running those softwares on an Intel hardware. And because you need to drive those costs down to keep that infrastructure. And then, of course, once you build that, then you have to automate that. You can build telemetry into the infrastructure with software, and then you can automate that particular infrastructure. If you look at how Google or Microsoft or Facebook operate their data centers, they have something called eventual consistency problem. They operate on a principle called eventual consistency. What does that mean? It really means that the infrastructure is so large and the changes are so often in the infrastructure that at no given point in time, an infrastructure is fully consistent. How does that happen? Well, it happens because the infrastructure is highly instrumented. There's a lot of telemetry that's coming out from the infrastructure, and there's a lot of analytics that's taking place on the infrastructure. So what they have done is actually built a complete closed-loop feedback system on that to operate that infrastructure in an intelligent manner. Now, 2 points I'll make on AI and how AI can really help here in this particular situation. AI allowed Walmart to put Pop-Tarts on the front shelves whenever there was a hurricane that was coming. Now, what has a hurricane got to do with Pop-Tarts? Well, they figured out that people, when they were buying water and food, because they were going to be indoors for a couple of days when a hurricane hit the shore, they also bought Pop-Tarts. That was only possible through data correlation. They kept track of what was being sold, when, at what time, and how, and then they correlated to find out that there were more sales of Pop-Tarts during those seasons. So they immediately brought those Pop-Tarts out and started placing them right in front of the checkout counter. That happened through machine learning, that happened through intelligence. Same thing that you can accommodate or apply in terms of a concept here. A mining company figured out that there were equipment failures when the external temperature was within a certain range, and the operating vehicle temperature was within a certain range. They started to see transmission failures. It was not that the vehicle temperature was too high, it was not that the external temperature was too high, but they could draw a correlation based on data. That possibility is now there with this type of an intelligent infrastructure. So to build really intelligent connectivity, you can really realize only through proper instrumentation, proper automation, and that can only be possible if you softwareize infrastructure.
That's great. I think actually showing use of IoT data for actual outcomes, great example of that.